Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be a video on the 24/25 season rule changes for Fantasy Premier League. Of course, the biggest news that we got today was that there were three main changes, I would say, being released to FPL that would change substantially how we play FPL from previous seasons. The most important thing and the most important rule change is the change to transfer logic, and I'll talk about that in a moment. The second one would have been the bonus point changes, and the third one, in my opinion, is the mysterious chip change. And unfortunately, of course, the mysterious chip change, there's not much to say about it because it's still a mystery, and FPL have confirmed that they will at least let us know before January, at least just from reading the article that they wrote about all the rule changes. Another impact, of course, is what I talked about already within my previous video, which is, of course, the pricing changes, right? You saw inflation definitely hit Arsenal defense. It's already hit Saka, Palmer, Foden, these sorts of players. So if you haven't seen that video, do feel free to check it out. I've already given my thoughts on most of the players within the game, and the game should be announced hopefully on Wednesday, and maybe you'll see this video when the game is already announced. But starting first from the most significant rule change, I think, is the transfer logic change. Now, the most important thing is to sort of give an illustration of how it previously worked and now how it will work going forward. So in the past, what we could do is roll a free transfer in FPL. So let's just use game week 1 as an example. You create a team, it's perfectly set in place. Game week 1 happens. By game week 2, you will have one free transfer. Now, on game week 2, you have a decision to make. You either make no decisions, e.g., you just, roll the transfer. That's what we call rolling. Or you would have used a transfer, and therefore, your free transfers would have reduced to 0. Any additional transfers after that would be for a hit, a -4. Now, the change is such that you can actually roll up to 5 free transfers at any one time. Because previously what would happen in an FPL context would be, if you, let's say, didn't make any moves in game week 2, you would roll the free transfer to game week 3 in the past. And on game week 3, you would be forced to at least make 1 transfer, 2 transfers, or of course, if you want to take hits, go for it as well. But in reality, the reason why you'd be forced to do 1 transfer is because the maximum amount of free transfers that anyone could hold at any one time in previous seasons was 2. And now it is actually extended to 5. And so that is the main change in the rules. And of course, there's an additional impact to that with regards to the wildcard and free hit chip. So previously, of course, I think what would happen is sometimes if you're very happy with the team that you created in game week 1 and you really had nothing to do in game week 2, by game week 3, usually what we would be forced to do, even if we were very happy with our team, would be we'd have to do, a goalkeeper to goalkeeper transfer, a defender to defender transfer, even a forward, like a 4.5 forward transfer to another 4.5 forward. Now you don't really have to do that. You can continue to roll if you're very happy with the shape of your team. And because you can roll up to 5 free transfers at any one time, a lot of people, I think, have already immediately jumped onto the idea that maybe you should practice a little bit more of a patient approach in FPL. I kind of agree with that, but I also think that the reality of Premier League and football, as we know, is that you will suffer from things like injuries, right? Something that happened a lot last season was the fact that injuries hurt our teams a lot. So instead of actually being able to even roll free transfers, what would happen is sometimes we'd have to take hits because there really were that many injuries. And at the same time as well, previously, we had a lot more double game weeks and blank game weeks in FPL. The biggest change that isn't related to FPL rules per se, but rather the Premier League and scheduling around the FA Cup, is that the impact of that means there will be less double game weeks this season and less blank game weeks, which also means, of course, hopefully less hits than most previous years, where you'd have to sort of, quickly reacclimate your team to the landscape of the changing doubles as a result of these FA Cup fixture outcomes. Now, as I said, going back to the rule change where you can now roll from at least 2 free transfers at any one time to now 5, the biggest change actually is also how these free transfers get saved after you use a wildcard chip or a free hit chip. Previously, if I just use my sort of game week 1 example, if I on game week 3 had 2 free transfers but decided to wildcard, what would happen on game week 4 is that I would actually end up with just 1 free transfer, and I wouldn't be able to roll the additional free transfer that I had, or the 2 free transfers that I had, into game week 4, because after you use a wildcard or after you use a free hit, it doesn't matter how many transfers you used to have before that game week where you used the chip, you would end up having, after you use the chip on the week subsequent to that, you'd only have 1 free transfer, and that was forced. The biggest change this season is that after using a wildcard, so let's say once again, I do nothing in game week 2, I wildcard on game week 3. The biggest change would be now I would have on game week 4 2 free transfers remaining. So I'd be able to carry over the amount of free transfers I had stored on game week 2 as long as it's less than 5. As long as it's less than 5, you can store those free transfers and they will be transferred across to your post wildcard landscape or your post free hit landscape. So a good example later into the season, let's say I have from let's say game week maybe 5, I've done 0 transfers starting from game week 1. So what would that mean? So game week 2, I've got a rolled free transfer. I've just got my 1 free transfer. Game week 3, 2. Game week 4, I'd have 3. Game week 5, I'd have 4. And then by the time it comes to game week 6, I wildcard. So if I wildcard on game week 6, by the time I get to game week 7, I will still have 4 free transfers remaining and a wildcard in place. So I think for those people who are actually quite aggressive in FPL, one transfer strategy, of course, is using the wildcard early, but not trying to use too many free transfers between, let's say, game weeks 1 to 4, game weeks 1 to 5, or even game weeks 1 to 6. You then wildcard early into the season, build up as many price rises as you like after, assessing the change in landscape. Because what usually happens in FPL is we tend to like to wildcard early, right? For example, last season, what was the prerequisite for us to wildcard? I think the prerequisite was actually United looked awful, let's be honest, and Tottenham actually looked a lot better than we expected. So teams like United were teams that we wanted to get rid of, and even Arsenal, for example, I think we were starting to get a sentiment that they were becoming a much more improved team on defense. So if you sort of felt like there was a bit of a sort of, I guess, landscape shift in terms of the teams or even in terms of the players in FPL, right? Let's say you spotted that there was a key player, someone who was vastly underpriced. Like let's say you've missed the boat on per se, maybe someone like João Pedro who's doing excellently and you wanted to get to him, but you also wanted to change your team around. Therefore, for example, when you downgrade from someone like Haaland to João Pedro, can you actually spend 9.5 million FPL immediately? Not really. But if you've rolled all these free transfers and you suddenly want to change your team structurally, and you're very confident that moving to, let's say, maybe a 3 forward structure without Haaland, but with João Pedro, and then you've already saved 4 free transfers by, let's say, I don't know, game week 5, what you can, of course, do is wildcard on game week 5 anyways, and then save those free transfers to sort of, continuously change your team around without having to make too many structural shifts because you've allowed your team to wildcard. And hopefully, of course, we'll find out exactly what happens with this mysterious chip by January. But hopefully that doesn't have any impacts on your planning in the sort of initial start of the game. So that's sort of the main transfer change. And I think that transfer logic change is very significant in FPL because how often will you have to plan for a situation where you would wildcard and you would usually dead end? Now, instead of that, you can actually think about wildcard as a little bit more of a flexible tool, right? If you have too many injuries at any one time, you don't really want to waste your free transfers on it, but you also don't see a future opportunity to wildcard. E.g., there are no crazy fixture swings that you think that you can take advantage of with the wild card. You can now take a little bit more of a passive approach with the wild card and just wait for an opportunity where, of course, miraculously 3 to 4 players get injured. What is a good example of that last season? I think last season, for example, when Haaland got injured, that would have been a perfect opportunity to exercise the wild card naturally because you'd have to completely change the structure of your team to allow for no Haaland, right? You're no longer spending 15 million in one position. You might want to insert some of the money into Trent. You might want to insert some of the money into the midfielders. You might want to also maybe change around your forward structure, right? Instead of having 2 forwards who are nailed, moving into a 3-4-3, for example. So all these kind of changes you'd have to make if a big premium in your team gets injured and you don't necessarily want to use the free transfers that you've stocked up on to make that change. You'd rather be a bit more flexible. And therefore, of course, if we take a bit more of a passive approach and you don't wildcard too early in the season, there's also that option. And of course, as I said, there's the aggressive option I outlined where you wildcard early, maybe let's say between game weeks 4 to 8, and you've saved a lot of free transfers and have therefore a security blanket on top of an early wildcard. So there are multiple scenarios at play here, and I think it's very, very helpful for the game. It also really helps the casual player, right? If you're someone who sometimes misses 1 game week at a time, 2 game weeks at a time, usually what would happen is because of the burning element of the free transfers, if you miss 2-3 game weeks at a time, you're already at a sort of losing position compared to some other people who might be fortunate enough to have additional free transfers compared to you. Now, because you can technically stock up the free transfers whilst you're sort of away from managing your team, you can still come back and still have, I think, the strength to sort of modify your team in a good way without being hurt by the fact that you've burned your transfers. So that's the transfer logic change. And I really like the fact that it applies to the wildcards and free hits, because I think it just means that particularly without, more double game weeks later down the season, wildcards will definitely be a little bit more free flowing, right? One player will probably wildcard because it's team dependent, as opposed to in previous seasons where a lot of people would all wildcard on game week 8, a lot of people would all wildcard on game week 35, or all wildcard on game week 30. So I think that is a really nice welcome change to the game. And of course, it is accentuated, of course, by the pricing in the game. The fact that we have, let's say, 4 players at around the price points of 9.5 million to 10.5 million, for example, Saka and Son at 10, Palmer at 10.5, and even Foden at 9.5. The impact of that is that if you create a team structure that only has, let's say, 1 or 2 spots for these players, you can continuously, of course, sort of move around these sorts of players and save your free transfers to make, important moves around these sort of sub-premium players, as opposed to, as the example that I gave in the beginning, where by game week 3, what we would sometimes do in a very perfect season and a perfect start to the season, which would be moving a 4.5 forward to a 4.5 forward. So that's a welcome change for sure. The next change is going to be the pitch design. No, I'm kidding. The pitch design, not a huge fan of it, but no, the next significant change is the changes to point scoring. The first one was, I believe, that a goalkeeper scoring a goal will be changed from 6 points to 10 points. How often does that happen? Honestly, not enough for me to talk about it for more than 10 seconds. So we're moving on to the next segment. The next segment is actually on the changes to the bonus system, which I think will not have a significant impact on how the season will work. It shouldn't have a huge or gigantic impact on how you evaluate players in FPL, but it can, of course, open your eyes to maybe different ways to watch football, right? You might now be looking at, targeting a certain type of defense or a certain type of attacker. And what are these changes? So the first change is that first of all, saving a penalty, a goalkeeper saving a penalty, that is. The first change is that saving a penalty, and this obviously impacts only goalkeepers, will reduce the bonus point system sort of accumulation from 15 to 9. So I'm not talking about bonus points in terms of the 1, 2, 3 bonus points that we get each week and each match, but rather the BPS calculation. So usually what happens in FPL now is that traditionally there's only 3 or 4 players who can actually get 1, 2, or 3 bonus points, and that is just coming down to what we call a total of BPS. And I will just be talking here specifically about BPS. So don't get too confused between bonus points and BPS, because I think bonus points is that sort of 1 to 3 accumulation that you see added on top of someone's score. BPS is sort of the calculation that leads you to getting that bonus point amount of 1 to 3. So for BPS, saving a penalty will be reduced from 15 to 9 points. So that obviously hurts goalkeepers a little bit in terms of situations in the past where we saw if you were a goalkeeper, maybe you conceded 4 goals, but somehow you saved a penalty, you'd somehow still find your way top of bonus, which was quite ridiculous, to be honest. Now, second of all, we also have new additions to the BPS system, which would be goalkeepers and defenders conceding a goal will be worth -4 BPS. Now, the significant impact of this, of course, is generally speaking, as soon as you lose your clean sheet, you've already lost the additional 12 points that you would usually get from BPS. And now, of course, you'll have an additional tax effectively of 4 points subtracted from your BPS total per goal that you concede. And I think the most impactful or most impacted position or style of player is, let's say, someone like Pedro Porro, right? Pedro Porro is someone who's extremely attacking, and we previously honestly picked him last season mostly because he's a very, very strong attacker, takes a lot of shots, gets into good positions, and at times obviously was a set piece taker. The main impact of this shift is that someone like Pedro Porro, who plays for what was an awful defense last season, particularly also exacerbated by injuries within Tottenham, and he would suffer much more in terms of being able to get additional, bonus points if he doesn't get a clean sheet. So that is a huge sort of, I think, negative impact on defenders, unfortunately. And I think, the Ait Nuris of the world, the Leif Davises of the world from Ipswich, who else comes to mind? I think Trippier, arguably, even Trent a little bit. These are still players who can very well play for much stronger defenses, right? I think Newcastle defense can take a step up if let's say Botman is fit, Pope is back. For Trent and Liverpool, of course, they were already a top 3 defense regardless last season, despite the huge drop off in April. So for the course of the season, they were still a top 3 defense. So for these sorts of teams and players, I don't think it has a huge impact. But for example, a team like Tottenham, which was actually a bottom half defense, despite their sort of league position, The impact, of course, is that they conceded a lot of goals, a lot more than a top half team would, and the impact on bonus points for an attacking fullback is going to be felt for players like Udogie and Porro, in my opinion. At the same time, I think it also gives a small little strength, of course, towards your Arsenals, your Man Cities of the world, right? Because they are so much stronger as a quality defense and so much more likely to get clean sheets compared to the rest. Their ability to sort of retain their bonus points within the defenders, I think, is still quite high, which is very nice, of course, to see. The next impact is going to be a goal line clearance will be worth 3 bonus points. So, of course, that's a little bit positive in the direction for defenders, but honestly, how often do you see goal line clearances? I think this is not going to counterbalance, for example, the huge negative impact of conceding goals for defenders and goalkeepers. And a foul won will be worth 1 bonus point. Right now, this is the change that actually impacts attackers. So a foul won is basically just a foul drawn. So what I've done is created a very informal sort of list of the top 20 players that I think are still relevant for FPL 24-25. So, for example, Michael Olise, unfortunately, he's gone. He's gone to Bayern Munich. He will no longer be a part of this list and this metric, but I've kept 20 players that I think are FPL relevant, certainly, at least relevant options to pick from. And of course, in terms of fouls drawn, this is only +1 BPS per game, and as you can see, most of the top players really only get between 2 fouls drawn per game, per 90 rather, is the metric that I've chosen to use today, just to sort of reflect, of course, if these players play good consistent minutes, what you can expect from them in a full game. Between 1.9 from the bottom of this list here in Valentino Livramento to 3.7 Jack Grealish here. So actually, it's not really that significant, to be honest. It's just a small sliver of an increase to attackers. So Jack Grealish, of course, at the best here. IU as well. Unfortunately, IU, we know, probably less relevant compared to someone like Eze, who's also on this list anyways, so that's very nice to see. Maddison is nice. Bruno Guimaraes was a huge shock to me, and he actually also led the Premier League in fouls drawn in general, but of course, because Jack Grealish, IU, Maddison, these players played much less minutes than Bruno Guimaraes, he ultimately, of course, topped the league table, but still getting 3 fouls drawn per game as a center mid, very, very good. Kudus and João Pedro, I think, are the most interesting ones, right? We just jumped into the territory where I think they are genuinely relevant picks. Kudus, of course, is going to be playing it for a new manager this season. So hopefully, of course, if West Ham become a little bit more expansive as a team, I think the big knock-on impact on Kudus is not only just, hopefully more chances at, being contributory towards goals and assists, but the fact that, he's very good at fouls drawn per game is going to help in general his sort of BPS calculation. João Pedro is also up there, and this is very interesting, right? Because João Pedro, we know, is priced at 5.5 million as a forward on penalties, and as long as his minutes are good, this is once again another metric that sort of exacerbates how good he could be in terms of calculation of bonus points and, of course, BPS, as a direct impact of this. Lucas Paqueta, I don't know. I think he might be suspended from football, so we'll find out there. Harry Wilson, Alex Scott, not too interesting, of course. Alex Scott is an interesting player in the sense that Bournemouth, of course, we might expect to continue improving as a team. And obviously, as a young player, Alex Scott, his first league in the Premier season, his first season in the Premier League already completed. It's very possible that he can play a little bit more of an expansive role for Bournemouth, and we could genuinely look at him as an interesting pick later down the line. But I think for now, of course, not something that's too interesting. Anthony, not too FPL relevant. Saka, Eze, Gordon, Gakpo, these are all very FPL relevant players. So I think it's a nice little boost to their sort of BPS calculations. There were many games I remember myself where Saka and Gordon didn't come that close to getting bonus in total, but the fact that they can actually get, another route towards getting BPS is very nice. And I think that's a huge contributor. Another thing too, of course, is you need to look at the alternatives in each team, right? For example, Jack Grealish is top by a far mile for all the Man City midfielders, whereas obviously with the situation here with Eze, of course, if IU is competing with more fouls drawn, that's obviously going to be an overall net boost to IU in comparison to Eze. But of course, objectively speaking, it's a nice boost to Eze. Anthony Gordon, of course, that's nice considering we don't see really Isak here, but we do see, of course, Bruno Guimaraes. Gakpo is nice. Hopefully he plays a little bit more of an expanded role, but I think he's also one of those players where I mentioned within my price reveal video that I'd like to see more minutes from him, and I'd like to see Liverpool from the start before I really jump on, let's say, triple Liverpool at the start of the season, unless the preseason makes me completely convinced that his minutes are going to be very strong. He's also coming back from the Euros as well. McGinn, not too interesting to be honest, but I think he might be on some set pieces, so I'll probably pass on him. Ait Nouri is interesting, of course. One of the defenders I talked about where, unfortunately he's going to hurt, as being part of that Wolves defense, will probably continuously lose a lot of clean sheets and therefore also -4 BPS per goal conceded. So this is at least offsetting that a little bit, but I don't think it's going to offset that nearly enough, and that's an unfortunate thing. With Gabriel Jesus and Bumo, Rodrigo Muniz, I think Jesus, obviously, we saw his minutes sort of take a nosedive at the end of last season. I'm not very confident in him as an FPL asset for now because I think his minutes are quite low, and it's also very possible that Arsenal continue to utilize him even as maybe a Saka substitute, which was something that happened last season, and continue to play maybe Havertz, a little bit at center forward, a little bit at center mid, and that's very plausible. And of course, his minutes are not nearly as good as, for example, Havertz. Muniz, of course, I think the interesting thing is that we also saw potential, of course, for other players to sort of rotate close to the end of last season, but it still seems like he would very much likely be the starting center forward for Fulham. So good to see some nice sort of fouls drawn metrics here as well, because I'm sure we'll see him in the shots on target metric next. And Livramento, of course, unfortunately, I think a little bit hampered by the fact that Trippier still seems to be set to staying at Newcastle. So we'll see what happens there. But that's that. That's not too interesting. But I think the most interesting impact is going to be shots on target per 90, right? And we can quickly switch over to that metric because shots on target would now be worth 2 bonus points. And I think that, of course, as you can even compare it to fouls drawn. For example, the best player at fouls drawn was Jack Grealish. He got 3.7 fouls drawn per game. So effectively, you're looking at, probably between 3 to 4 additional BPS per game for Jack Grealish. But then the next best player in that sort of tier was Ayew and Maddison, who was getting around 3. And then everyone else was around, 2 plus. So really, you're just looking at 2 to 3 maximum, usually 1 to 3 for some of the other players. Now, with shots on target, though, you're getting 2 points per game. And there's actually a lot of strikers here who are getting close towards 2 shots on target per game, right? And that's very, very nice. And, 1 shot per target on game already, that puts you with 2 BPS. So I think very, very impactful as well. Considering that a lot of these strikers will also probably be decent at getting fouls drawn, or even if they're not strikers, if they're midfielders, even better, right? So I think here, of course, Darwin Nunez, this is an interesting one. A lot of people are going to say, what about big chances missed? What about, shots off target? Now I've looked into the shots on target percentage of Darwin, and I've compared him to players like Salah, Haaland, Watkins, and actually he's very similar on shots on target percentage. However, the biggest thing, of course, is that Darwin Nunez is unfortunately the king of big chances missed in the previous season. Whether that will sort of replicate itself, I think we'll find out. But clearly, of course, he does miss a fair few more big chances than the rest, and that obviously has previously hurt his bonus points sort of accumulation potential previously. However, this is just going to simply help him, right? As a player who effectively spams the most shots on target in the league, this is at least something that's going to help in the positive direction for Darwin. So it's already going to be better than in the previous season. As far as Haaland, Salah, there's not much to really talk about these players. We expect them to be really close to the top. They're also the most expensively priced players in the game. So we'll just quickly move on. Wilson, I think his minutes could definitely dwindle. I mean, he is an aging profile of a player. Not too interesting. Phil Foden, though, is interesting because I think Phil Foden was actually pretty good at fouls drawn as far as I could see, because he also plays really consistent minutes for City now. We didn't see him in the fouls drawn per 90 metric just now, but he was still very close towards that sort of top 20 list that I created. And Phil Foden, of course, is still very good at shots on target per 90. And as you can see here, obviously just below Salah in terms of the midfielders. So I do really like that aspect of Phil Foden, considering that he was actually just priced at 9.5. And also, as we saw close to the end of last season, took more set pieces as well, more than usual, and in general, of course, transformed into the player of the season and was just an incredible ball striker. Now, one of the things I'll mention too, for example, with Foden is, look, ultimately, when you're looking at someone having such a prolific scoring season, I mean, Odegaard, the season previous, had sort of done that as well, and his scoring numbers had dipped off. Do I think Foden will necessarily dip off? I'd say probably on the eyes, I'd say Foden still comes off to me as a little bit of a better finisher than Odegaard, but that's not sample size, that's not data. So it'll be interesting to see, of course, if Foden can sort of repeat the heroics. But in general, of course, the fact that he does very well and performs really well on a lot of metrics like shots on target and fouls drawn is just going to be a boost towards how we evaluate him as a player. Richarlison, Jota, I think quite subjective because Jota is minutes dependent. Richarlison, of course, dependent on whether he stays within the Premier League. Muniz and Eze definitely very interesting. Eze, we've already seen him in fouls drawn per 90. We've already seen him close to the top here on shots on target per 90. And just the fact that I think, with Elise out, him probably getting penalties, maybe it's him or Mateta, but I think it's likely Eze that keeps penalties, hopefully, within Crystal Palace. I think at 7 million, he's probably the player that strikes out the most to me as being very interesting. Isak, incredible here at shots per 90 as well. Also a player who's actually pretty good at getting fouls drawn, even though he was missed out on the previous list. And then, of course, a lot of strikers in players like Cunha, Watkins, Gakpo, Tony, even Wood and Semenyo, right? Cole Palmer still being on this list is very nice. I think anytime you see a midfielder on this list, they're definitely a player to look at and consider quite highly because, of course, for midfielders, you always get a natural sort of points boost for clean sheets and goals scored. So if there's even sort of additional factors that allow you to get even more BPS and guarantee those bonus points, I mean, even better, especially for a metric like shots on target, which should really, I think, benefit strikers more often than not. So it's nice that Cole Palmer's here. And then rounding off, of course, is Alvarez and De Bruyne. Alvarez, I think, as we mentioned in the price reveals video, is very pricely cheap if Haaland has an injury. But he might also, as I said, be leaving. And I saw some Atletico Madrid rumors in the morning. So it's very possible that we might not even see Alvarez going forwards. And maybe it's back to Phil Foden, false nine, potentially. Or maybe they get a like-for-like replacement. But nice to see these options on here as well. But yeah, generally speaking, I think what is the overall impact of the BPS changes? I think, unfortunately, the overall impact of these BPS changes it means that goalkeepers and defenders are slightly worse. How much worse, I think, is a question to ask. Because I think, generally, of course, if you think about the amount of goals scored last season, it was a record high in the Premier League. So, technically, you're taking away much more bonus points per season than, like, in previous years. And we expect, I think, the scoring inflation to potentially continue, or at least stay the same on pace with last season. So, that's a lot more BPS taken away from defenders and goalkeepers just to start with. And that probably means much less chances, if we replayed games from last season, for them to get bonus points in general. On the other side, of course, fouls won, shots on target should, as you can see from these lists, benefit strikers, benefit midfielders. And for that reason, of course, that's more points geared towards the midfielders and forwards. So what does that really say? I think what that does say is probably we might just be considering that this season is one where putting as much money as possible into the attackers makes a lot more sense than trying to create a very well-rounded team that has really great defenders. Now, on the flip side, I think one thing I will say is that clearly, of course, the sort of -4 impact seemingly hurts teams that don't keep clean sheets. So, of course, that might be a little bit more of a negative sort of contributor to, lessening the points of players from, let's say, Fulham, for example, where, Leno is a great shot stopper. What else is a good example? I think even Pickford, arguably, he made a lot of great saves last season, but he also was very good in clean sheets. So not exactly a great example, but Leno, I think, was definitely great at saving in many sort of instances of games. And of course, maybe losing clean sheets isn't helpful. Porro in the defensive position, very good example of a player who probably got bonus points despite, losing clean sheets. And generally speaking, of course, if you replayed those games, if you added the fouls drawn points, if you added, for example, the shot on target points, even more unlikely that they keep bonus points in any scenario, whether they keep a clean sheet or not. And that seems to be the way that FPL wants, the scoring to change in the game. I think we just need to show a little bit more of an appreciation for that. But another thing, too, that's nice is, of course, some of the leading players within these metrics are not necessarily just Haaland and Salah, right? It's also still players like Eze who are very well priced at 7.0. It's also players like Mbumo, for example, at that same price point. We also have some forwards here who are, between that sort of 5.5 million price point, like João Pedro, which is still ridiculous, I have to say, up to Chris Wood, like 6 million, and even Mateus Cunha at 6.5. So you don't necessarily need to just spend top heavy on forwards, but of course it just shows you that, prioritizing the money around there might make sense, of course, just intuitively looking at the season. Now, putting things into practice, and I think just talking quickly about the last rule change, the most impactful change, of course, is going to be this sort of mysterious chip. Now, from what I can see about this mysterious chip, basically, it's just going to be a chip that we have absolutely no clue about. Potentially, I think FPL might even be doing a little bit of a sort of social media sort of experiment where they find out all the options that people are going to suggest what the new chip is going to be, and they probably pick the best option. That's a joke, but it's very possible that they could do it because they also said that it will be revealed ahead of January 2025. So the chip will be playable coming January, but we're going to start the season in game week 1 in a few weeks' time without even knowing what one of the chips within the season will be. And I think it's really counterintuitive to me, to be honest. I like planning. I like sort of trying to assess all the information I have in front of me. And right now, I don't have information in front of me. And apparently, it's going to come before January. So we're going to somehow start the season in FPL. Hopefully, this chip will not have any impacts on, our experience playing between, let's say, August and December. And we'll find out, of course, what that chip is later down the line. But I think this is the only change I'm not too happy about, right? If you're going to reveal a new change that's going to impact the season, just tell us before the season starts, please. And that's it. But that's the mysterious FPL chip. Unfortunately, I don't have information on it. But overall, I think, what do I think about the changes in general? I think in general that sort of transfer logic change is the most impactful in the sense that it will probably, reward people who might take a little bit more of a patient approach, right? It might sort of devalue some hits. And to be honest, it also, I think, helps for the sort of manager who's maybe done really well with the wildcard, right? Let's say you've created the perfect team in game week 1. As I said, instead of that sort of scenario where you're doing a 4.5 to 4.5 transfer on game week 3, you just get to continue rolling your free transfers and you continue to sort of build on your lead. Now, this is a point that was made by Praz, but I also think at the same time, we know how FPL works, right? The template changes very radically in the game. And ultimately, even if you're ahead of the curve, you can suddenly fall into a trap where by the next week, you're behind the curve because suddenly your differential is injured. Or suddenly, of course, you have so many issues coming into your squad. Like, for example, you're stacked into 3 Man United players. Some sort of disease has sort of hit the Man United camp and the game has to be suspended. Something like that. Like, that can always happen. And you never know. But I think, of course, it does in general help a little bit more of a patient approach. I also like the fact that it helps, as I said, the casual player who has missed 2 to 3 weeks at one time and finds it very hard to catch up because their team is vastly behind the curve and they don't have enough transfers to really rectify it and they're forced to use a chip like the wild card. Now, I think it also even ultimately devalues a little bit the free hit chip and the wild card chip, but it also makes it, I think, a little bsome more of a fun experience in the sense that, you don't need to be forced to dead end all the time. You don't need to, find a perfect window to wildcard. You can sort of play some sort of free-flowing fantasy management and you can just find an opportunity to wildcard when, let's say, suddenly, oh, my team's hit 3 to 4 injuries. I've been hit by a complete wall. I'd rather just use a wildcard and save the free transfers for a rainy day. And that's pretty much it. So those are my thoughts. I also don't think we're going to be suddenly rolling up to 5 free transfers immediately, right? The reality, as I said, is that you're probably going to, at best, save up to 3 transfers at one point in the season. How often will I be with 4 to 5 free transfers? I highly doubt it. It will happen in 24-25, but let's roll on the season and hopefully the game will get released by the time this video is uploaded. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.